Hello, everybody. I'm Sean Reynolds from Sportsnet, joined by Ken Weeb from Sportsnet. Together, we are Kenny and Renny, and this is the Kenny and Renny long-form show that we haven't been able to get to as consistently this year, Ken, as we have, or as we did in the first season of this show. And COVID may be putting us in a direction where we'll be able to do it more consistently because we're heading closer and closer back into the homes. I know I spent the day picking up test kits from my kids' schools, and we're going to be doing the home learning for an extra week here, so we know we're heading in that direction. But good to be getting back to this, and an absolutely huge guest on the show today. This is our great white whale, Ken. This is our Moby Dick. We've been chasing him down and harassing Kevin Bieksa for a long time now, and I think that I had dinner with him in Montreal during the Stanley Cup Final, him and a number of Sportsnet people. It wasn't just he and I bugged him about not coming on the show. And you and Kevin have a relationship from your time covering him with the Manitoba Moose. So he told me in true fashion, he wanted to make you earn it. So I think you've earned it, Ken. You should pat yourself on the back. But yeah, I mean, we'll get into it with him right away. But just maybe for you, just to start out, kind of what it meant to cover those early Moose teams that you saw so much skill head through to such a powerhouse Vancouver team, and where Kevin Bieksa fits in to all that.
Yeah, happy New Year, Sean, to you and our listeners for sure. Interesting times, certainly feeling good. Kevin's a great individual. Came in some interesting circumstances on just an ATO tryout after his career in college, and made a pretty big impression. In his full-time season with the Moose. One of the great human beings and one of the great personalities. You could tell back then that Kevin was one of those articulate, intellectual guys, but also a guy who played the game pretty hard. He was easy to. He became a fan favorite pretty quickly because of how hard that he played, and always really smart guy to talk to. And it's been great to see him spread his wings in the journalism career, coming onto this side of the fence. But those Moose teams were a lot of fun. So much talent and skill came through that mix, and a lot of those guys that were a big part of that 2011 team. That made it all the way to Game 7 of the Stanley Cup Final. I was in the building that night when Game 7 was won by their opponent, and Kevin was one of those guys who spoke afterward. It was obviously, that's a tough moment to go through for anyone, but he handled himself with incredible professionalism and has continued to do that throughout his entire career. So it's great to have him on, and let's not hesitate. Let's get him right in here.
Let's bring him in. One of the interesting things, Kevin, as we bring him into the show, Kevin, it's great to see you. If you got a lamp that you could put on your face, it would help.
No kidding.
That's some good backlighting.
That looked a little bit. That some online stalking was happening there for a second.
The problem is it's such a nice day out here. It's like the perfect weather, like Winnipeg weather, but I'm in Ontario. That's the only problem.
Yeah, so that's what I found. The perfect weather for me was when I was in Ontario as well, when I lived in Toronto for 2 years. But Kevin, I was saying before you got out here, you're the great white whale of this show. I told you that in the summertime. We've been trying to get you on the show for a long time. Finally get you. Yeah. Hey, we're just going to get right into it. Someone asked, we like to, have the fans be able to chime in when they do. You told me this story. I want to know, are you the inventor of the Superman punch in the NHL? And give me an idea of where that originated, because I know it didn't originate in the league. I think it originated not even on the ice. Give me an idea of how you added that to the repertoire.
Yeah, well, maybe let me ask you the question first. Like, what's the demographic for your audience before we start telling these stories? Like, who am I tailoring this to?
Kevin gets to tailor this to whoever he wants. You get to fly free on the Kenny and Renny show. So have at her, my man.
You know what's funny is before I answer your question, Ben Sherrod, who played for the Jets for years, and I think it's pretty well known that him and I have trained together over the years, and I've kind of tried to mentor him. I'm not taking full credit for how good he's turned out, but when he was playing for the Jets, I guess they were in Vegas, and Forrest Griffin, they went to the UFC gym to tour, and Forrest Griffin was there, and it was just after my one, I think it was the Radko Gudas Superman punch, and he said, "Who's that guy that just threw the Superman punch on the ice?" And then Ben obviously said, "Yeah, he's a buddy of mine that I train with," and he's like, "That was pretty cool." So that was kind of my validation when Forrest Griffin was, seeing my punch, and Dana White commented, but to answer your question, guys, first of all, I can't believe I'm finally on. We've been kind of going back and forth here for it seems like a couple years.
It's
Weaver,
been a
with
long
you.
courtship. It's a long courtship, yeah.
And then with Renny, we hung out during the Stanley Cup Finals a little bit, and I realized, oh, this guy's not that bad. Maybe I will come on the show. I remember we were drinking a lot of orange wine the one night, and I vaguely remember a story of you falling off a bridge or something like that. And I don't know if that was a dream or not.
It's a true
real
story. Yeah, it's a real story. Yeah, it's true.
And he hasn't even shared that one on the show. We'll have to maybe save that one for another time. I'll have to bust that out.
That's my since we're talking superheroes, that's my journalism superhero origin story. I was just a Jimmy Olsen kind of character before falling off that bridge. I emerged the journalist I am today, Kevin.
Well, there's a great story, Weaver, if you're ever looking to kill some time. But
he's told me it's wild.
The Superman punch kind of started out of, I don't know, self-preservation. It was a college fight. It was a fight in a parking lot, sticking up for a buddy on my hockey team who got punched in a house party, and somehow ended up squaring off with this 300-pound rugby guy. And, odds were probably against me. I don't even think my buddies were betting on me, but we squared off, and the first Superman punch, kind of presented itself, and it landed. It was probably the best one of my career. And then, I think I was a little bit ahead of my time as far as training for fighting in hockey. I don't think a lot of guys trained for fighting. I think it was more of a reactionary thing. And I kind of as my career got going, obviously it was a big part of my game, and I wasn't considered a fighter, but I fought once in a while. I fought because, first of all, I enjoyed it. Second of all, it created room for me. Third of all, it stuck up for teammates and just added another element to my game. So I started thinking, during my training, implementing some sort of offensive attack right off the bat. And Rick Rippon was probably the inspiration, because he used to throw a lot of punches coming into fights. And I remember just sitting back and even though he was my peer and he was a couple years younger than me and on my team, I'm watching how good of a fighter he is and how successful he is. I'm like, I got to get that into my arsenal somehow. So I kind of took it to the next level. A lot of practice, a lot of picturing Dion Phaneuf in my garage in the summer while I'm practicing it. It's funny the things that you do to get yourself ready. But I threw it probably 15 times in my career, and obviously there's a couple more that landed than others.
Obviously, I was there early in your career, Kevin. I always felt like you were more engaged when you seemed like to be one of those guys who needed to fight every certain amount of games in order to be at your peak. Is that how you viewed it as well? And did you feel like you were more on edge when that element was happening with a little bit more regularity, especially maybe early on in your career?
Yeah, well, I'll start maybe earlier in my career playing for the Manitoba Moose and Randy Carlyle. I think on record, I fought 14 times that season during the lockout, and I probably actually fought more. Some of those didn't turn out to actual 5-minute fights, but Randy used to call me into his office in the MTS Center when it was brand new, every probably 10 days if I didn't have a fight. And I'd come in, I'd sit down, and after a while I picked up on it, and he'd say, "When was your last fight?" And after the first couple meetings, I did my homework, and I'd be like, 12 days, Randy. And he goes, "Yeah, you're due." And okay, I get the message, young guy just trying to make it and play as many games as I could, and willing to listen to anything. And then as my career went on, obviously I didn't count the days in between, but I was aware. I usually like to get a fight off in either preseason or right at the start of the season. And then strategically, every month, if I go a while without a fight, I'd look at the calendar and I'm like, okay, road trip coming up. Who do the Jets have? Jets have Buffalo. They have, Wheeler. They got Peluso. Oh, Peluso's out of my kind of league a little bit. Maybe Buffalo. Oh, he might not fight me. And I kind of go through it a bit. Okay, I'm probably not going to get a fight in Winnipeg. Who do we play the next night? Next night we played Minnesota. Okay, maybe Marcus Foligno. So I started to kind of look at the schedule a little bit, because again, I enjoyed fighting, and it helped my game out.
So you'd look ahead at what was coming. You played in the league, Kevin, at a time
That's
where
basically what I just said, Renny.
Yeah, that's I'm building off what you say. It's called storytelling.
Give
Kevin.
him some time.
Okay.
Give him some time.
Okay.
Yeah, you looked ahead to your fights, and what I'm trying to get is, in that time, you played in the league at a time where, to be a tough guy, you had to be tough. The league was a tough league, and a lot of times, to be tough, you had to be really big. Now, you're not a small guy, but you're not big in terms of how the league was back in those days. And some of the guys who fought back then were absolute killers. You talked about Peluso maybe being out of your league, but we hear these stories later on. Guys like George Laraque talked about like how they'd have trouble sleeping the night before fights, and how it kind of like the mentality of going into those fights. It was almost like you were fighting for your life. You feared up until that moment, then you'd get the rush and you'd get through it, and it felt good afterwards until you started having to build up to the next fight. Did you have any of that? Did you have any of that anxiety leading up to fights, or you say that you enjoyed it? Was it just all enjoyment from day one?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, it's a really long question, but I think I get the gist of it.
You better.
To answer your question a few different ways. First of all, not every fight I had was looking ahead. Some of them were, well, a lot of them were reactionary, right, to what happened in the game. Again, like I wasn't considered a fighter. Like I talked about Randy Carlyle. Once I got to the NHL, like my first full season, I had 42 points. Right. So for a defenseman, that's a lot. So after that, I was able to kind of pick my spots a little bit more. I was playing top minutes. So my job wasn't to fight. So I don't think I had the same stresses and anxieties as I just mentioned, a Mike Peluso or a George Laraque or a Darcy Hordichuk or even a Rick Rippon who, you know, had to fight quite a bit. Like I didn't have those stresses because I didn't have to fight. If it didn't turn out that night, didn't matter, right? I was still going to make my impact on the game, offensively, defensively, any other way. So I'm not taken away from the anxieties of the job, but I wouldn't say I had a ton of it just because for that reason, right? It was never like I'm looking at the game, I'm like, I have to fight tonight. There was a couple situations where I knew going into a game. I remember once in Anaheim, Randy Carlyle again, shocker, but pulled me in and said I wasn't going to be playing or something like that. Like basically a little bit of a threat. And I went out and I fought Kyle Clifford that night. I had a couple of those throughout my career, but I didn't have them every night.
Obviously, one of the other famous fights from the Winnipeg days you've had to talk about a lot, about the Fedorov incident. How did you guys keep it a secret? Because I can remember the Moose Yearling Foundation dinner, I think, was very shortly after that, and Fedorov was at our table, and I asked, well, what happened? And he gave me some kind of BS story. I'm more interested in how you were able to keep it kind of on the down low, considering Winnipeg's such a small place, and you know where the location was a place where a lot of people attended, I guess.
Especially you, Weber, but but it's the ultimate hockey story for that reason, because it was a team out galvanizing, bonding after a loss that eliminated the team from the playoffs that year, and just something that happened out of nothing. Nothing major happened that instigated the fight. It just happened, right? Like it does sometimes. And following the fight, the next day I remember was a day off, and obviously management found out about it. They made their phone calls and got the story from us. But the next practice day we had, Dallas Eakins was the captain, and he called a meeting before practice. And Dally said, okay, obviously everybody knows that Kevin and Fedor got into a fight. Fedor fell down the stairs. Kevin, you hit your head. Everybody good? Break. And we kind of just went off on our separate ways. And when the media comes in, you just, there's no need to mention it because there's just nothing there. And I think I ended up walking by Fedor's stall after and just kind of like smiled and like shook his hand. And like, I think we went out for dinner with Koltsov like a few nights later. It was typical hockey stuff after it was over. No hard feelings, kind of just a fun experience more for me than him. But it was just one of those things that you don't hold grudges about,
Kevin, when players go into the Hockey Hall of Fame, there's always the question of what jersey would they wear? What hat would they wear? You're so well known as a Vancouver Canuck. Saw your time when you were down in Anaheim, but so many people here, your time with the Manitoba Moose resonated with them. Do you, as a pro hockey player who goes on to a good career like you had, do you kind of park the AHL stuff in the back of your mind, or do you kind of wear that tattoo of the Manitoba Moose on your heart wherever you go?
So my gym, I'm at my cottage right now in Northern Ontario. My gym in the garage is basically, throughout my career, I worked out at my own gym in the summers. I always train in my own place by myself, no training partners. Obviously, when I went to camp, I trained with the Sedins or whoever was there early. But in my gym right now, it's my whole garage, like a triple garage. It's all a gym. So everybody in my family exercises, works out. I have a ton of machines and ellipticals and treadmills and all that stuff. I still have my Manitoba Moose jersey front and center. So I think that kind of answers your question, what Manitoba meant to me. It gave me an opportunity to prove myself that I could play pro hockey, because I came out of college and I had an agent or a family advisor, and since I got after my first year getting drafted in college, he didn't return my calls for 3 years, my last 3 years. So I went into my senior year at the end of the year, and I had no communication, nothing set up afterwards. Yeah, sure, I was drafted by Vancouver, but I hadn't even heard of them, from them in a couple of years. The guy who drafted me was fired. So when I switched agents to Kurt Overhart, who's turned into a really good friend and a mentor, he got me to Manitoba on an ATO like Weaver you mentioned, and basically I had to prove that I could even play in the AHL, let alone the NHL. And Manitoba gave me my first chance, that 4-game stint where I ended up getting into a fight with a teammate, and Brian Burke happened to be in charge of Vancouver, and I was lucky that he kind of liked that kind of thing. I was lucky that Zinger and Stan Smeal and they didn't pull the plug on me, and they let me come back to camp and the next year and work my way onto the team. So very grateful for my years in Manitoba. And I don't know, that's a tough question, which jersey I would wear, but Manitoba would certainly be in consideration.
What do you remember about that phone call with Berkey afterward? I mean, I know you've spoken about it in a number of different places, including on the University of Regina thing that you guys did at my alma mater. I think that was last year, I guess.
So what's great about Berkey is Berkey's got a lot of stories, and every time you hear them, they change a little bit, right? So I love Berkey. I spent so much time with him, especially like the last couple of years working playoffs with him. We'd always go out for a drink afterwards at his Moxie's down the street. And I spent a lot of time with Berkey, and I've heard his version of the story a million times. And every time it's just a little bit different. And I remember like, he'll tell the story, and like somebody like David Amber or Elliot will be there, and they'll just kind of look at me like, that really happened? I'm like, no, maybe not like that. But I never actually talked to Berkey. That's the problem, or that's the thing. I talked to Steve Tambellini. He called me. Zinger called me, who was the GM of the Moose at the time. And then Stan Smeal called me, who was the head coach of the Moose at the time. But it never actually got up to Berkey. But Berkey obviously had some impact.
I like asking this question because I'm surprised by it often. I asked Mark Scheifele this question when he kind of got to the stage that he thought, I could actually make the NHL. He told me he was 17 years old and 2 months into his first OHL season before he was like, maybe I could actually pull this off. Your path, like you said, you kind of got drafted and then got forgotten for a little bit. At what point did you kind of think, I've got a shot at making this? And did you feel like you lost it for a while and had to reclaim it?
Well, it wasn't 17, not even close to that. Thinking about 17, at 17 years old, I think I just got sent down from Tier 2 Junior A to Junior B because I was healthy scratched every 4 games. I started off as a 16-year-old on the number 1 power play, making the team, and then worked my way all the way down the lineup until I was out. So definitely not at 17. I needed the 3 years of Tier 2 Junior A in Ontario to develop and grow. And then I needed the 4 years of college to really grow and to mature and to hit the gym. And, off ice was always kind of my leveling of the playing field where I could get my edge. I always felt like I was stronger and faster than everyone else because I just think I put more time in it than other people. So even playing in the AHL, that lockout year, it was a really good league. Spezza and Ray Emery, Chris, like every team had guys that ended up being big impact players in the NHL for the next 10 years. Ryan Miller, we're in that league. I had a really good season. I had Nolan Baumgartner kind of mentoring me on defense, and I kind of followed his lead, and we had a good team, and Kess and I kind of came onto our own. And then the following year I went to training camp and feeling good about myself. Just had a full year. Randy Carlisle's the coach, survived him. Going into camp, everything's great. And then second day of training camp in Whistler, high ankle sprain. Battling another guy during a drill, high ankle sprain. So I leave practice, and I've never had a high ankle sprain before. Worst injury I've ever had in my life because it's basically your ligament stretches, but it never heals or never goes back. You basically just have to wait for everything to just work, like strengthen around it so that it works again. So, I missed the rest of camp. I missed all preseason, and they're just sitting around like, when are you going to be ready? And I'm like, I don't know. So after 2.5 months, they're like, okay, well, you gotta go home. Like, you can't just hang out here, first of all. And so you're going to go back to your home in Grimsby, and then we want you to go to Manitoba and do all your rehabbing there. And so that was devastating for me. I went home, And I think my wife was maybe my fiance at that time. We packed our car and we drove out to Winnipeg. And she still says it was the most miserable she's ever seen me before in my life. And I said to her, listen, like I had my opportunity. I thought that was the end. I thought that was my last chance. I was never going to get another shot. You know, I was kind of in my prime, and then an injury takes me out of it. So that was a tough pill to swallow.
And then too, to make matters worse, Kevin, remember AV got on your case after that game against the Toronto Marlies, right? It was very early on your return. All I've heard about is how great Bieksa was last year. I haven't seen it yet, and I got out of that scrum. I'm like, oh boy, I didn't see that one coming. But then he had a really big impact on your career as you kind of went along.
Good old AV, right? I went up to his room after that, Weber, because he said the exact same thing in the dressing room in front of my teammates, and I kind of didn't even really acknowledge it too much, because what happened was I took a penalty. Somebody was digging at Wade Flaherty, our goalie, after the whistle, and I came and I took a penalty on the guy, sticking up for my goalie. Didn't think twice about my previous coach loved that kind of stuff, right? And then they score on the power play. It was to make it 1-1, but it ended up being a 6-5 game. So it didn't really factor into the game. And then after the game in the dressing room to the teammates, he's ripping me it's a selfish play and blah, blah, blah. Then he rips me in the media, and I'm like, okay, you can rip me in front of my teammates. That's fine. But what are you doing in the media? So I went up to his room at the hotel, and he answers the door in a tank top and his white underwear. And I'm like, what is this? I've been asking the guy all day, can I come talk to you? Can I come talk to you? And finally he lets me up there, and I'm like, oh my God. So I sit on the couch, he sits in the chair, he's still in his tank top and everything. And I go, what's your problem with me? Why are you ripping me? And he goes, oh, I don't even know what I say. I didn't even remember that media scrum and blah, blah, blah. But he ended up being probably one of the best head coaches I ever had. But he obviously had his ways of trying to motivate guys.
I find it so fascinating, the coaches that you were able to go through when you were with Manitoba. Dallas Eakins in the league right now, Randy Carlisle, phenomenal coach for years, AV. And then even when you get to guys like Zinger, who I'm sure you've got a phenomenal relationship with, and Mark Chipman, who is so hands-on, the quality and the top shelf nature of the people that they had in that organization. Does it surprise you that you ran into that many people at the AHL level of hockey?
Yeah, well, I mean, I didn't have any other experience with any other organizations, but I think as my career progressed and I moved a little bit, I realized how fortunate and lucky I was to be around such quality people. And you see them all, Chipper and Zinger and those guys you mentioned making such an impact for so long. And now the NHL, they did that in the AHL and treated us all like NHL players back when we were making $35,000 a year. I was eating at Subway every day because that's all I could really afford for my rent at Evergreen. We call it Trump Towers, but it was really Evergreen Towers. And I had my TV on a box, and I slept on an air mattress the whole lockout year with Tomos Mojis. But they treated us. We get to the rink, and they would treat us like NHL players from the start, and spared no expense. And very, very appreciative of those guys. Those are quality people. And as you're around this game longer and longer, you realize they're not so common. There's very few people like Zinger and Chipper.
You touched on it, Kevin, about needing the time at the college level. I mean, the fact that it wasn't handed to you, I mean, you weren't a first-round draft pick. You had to kind of earn everything that you got at every level. I mean, what impact did that have on your career and maybe your appreciation for kind of living in the moment when you were going through, the ups and downs of an NHL career? There were a lot of ups, obviously, but it can be tough and it can be a grind at times.
Yeah, I think you just learn a lot about yourself and perseverance. And for me, I was a fifth rounder, so that's not very high, and basically had to fight and scratch and claw to get everything that I got. And just having that chip on your shoulder, that could do so much for you in life, in anything, right? Always having that chip on your shoulder and never being satisfied and being hungry. And I coach high school hockey now, my son's team, and I run an academy, and it's very difficult for me when I see these kids that don't have a chip on their shoulder, and it's not their fault, right? It's their upbringing. They're, they have great parents. I had great parents, but they have, great parents that live together, and they have comfortable lifestyles, and they fly to Hawaii on their vacations. And that's certainly not their fault. They're products of their environment. But when they get on the ice, they just don't have that chip on their shoulder that I had. And it's just hard. It's hard to see kids that don't want to play the game that way. But I kind of had to. Like I had to do that if I wanted to be successful, and it really helped me. It's still helping me to this day to have that chip on your shoulder. Controlling it's another thing, but it's what is it? It's better to paint stripes on a zebra than tame a cheetah or something like that.
I've never heard that saying before.
Yeah, something like
that.
Copyright that. Copyright that.
Yeah.
A couple different ways I want to go with that, but the hockey in California, your son coming up so you come out of small town Ontario, you fight your way into the league like that. I was looking at the numbers of players who had come from certain number of states, what states are producing hockey players. And I was surprised to see how many hockey players are coming out of California. I wanted to get your take because you're now a bit of a power broker there. Your son was at the first game of the year that we did hockey night. It was a Wednesday night hockey. We showed him on camera there during the game, Jets and Anaheim game. But you coach that team. What's it like coaching kids in California outside the idea of them not having the chip on their shoulder? What do they do so well there?
Well, I mean, there's not every kid is fortunate in California. There's, it's a big state. There's as many people in California than in all of Canada. So there's a vast variety of different families and kids, and we have scholarship funds, and we some kids can't afford to play hockey, especially out in California where ice is on average $500 an hour. So if you're looking at just kind of what I've learned, and it's taken a while for California hockey to get going because, like anything, you need grassroots programs and you need quality coaching, and you need, most times you need ex-NHL or ex-pro hockey players or ex-pro coaches that stay around and start coaching their sons, and that kind of ensures that there's some sort of quality in the coaching, and that kind of just, snowballs from there. So, Brian Allen's coaching there now, and there's a bunch of guys. Jimmy Roy's still kind of lurking around, and he comes out and helps coach in the academy world once in a while. So you got a lot of ex-players. Scott Niedermayer coached for years when his kids were playing Team Solani. He helped coach. And I think that's where like the quality of coaching is starting to pick up a little bit. Still got a ways to go to catch the Minnesotas and the Bostons. But, if you look at the East Coast in the U.S., really tough players. Like the whole East Coast plays very aggressive. Minnesota is very, very skilled, but their knock is always at their soft. The players are a little bit on the softer side. And then in California, I think you have a little bit of a mix. You have, I think, a little bit of the toughness of the East Coast, maybe not as much. And you got probably, a little bit of skill, but not as much as Minnesota. So you're kind of like in the middle there, which is not a bad place to be.
Speaking of the hockey side, I mean, Kevin, you had a pretty cool experience with hometown hockey and then also being honored in your hometown. What was that like to kind of see and kind of turn back the clock a little bit, if you will, and walk down memory lane there?
So during my career, I was never a guy that thought about what I accomplished. Like even after the Stanley Cup run, I don't think even one night I sat around and thought, wow, like that was a great season. Wow, almost won. I was always like tunnel vision, like what's next? I'll think about my career after I'm done. Like I'll appreciate everything later. And, and then you get to realize this is just the way you are, and you never actually sit back and reflect. So, it's funny when I had that weekend and I knew it was coming up in Grimsby, I actually called my dad who lives in Vancouver, and I hadn't seen him in a year and a half because of COVID. And I said, I'm flying you into Toronto, and we're going to do this weekend together because I think it's important that you're beside me. If we're doing hometown hockey and we're talking about Grimsby, well, you're the one that moved us there. Like you're the one that knows more than anybody. Why did you choose Grimsby? So it was great. It was almost like I told my wife, it felt like a retirement ceremony for me, because it was a little bit of not closure, but it was finally an opportunity for me to reflect with my dad right beside me, my one brother who lives in Grimsby. I just wish my other brother was there who lives in Kelowna, but he obviously couldn't get out. And I wish my wife and kids were there too, but I can't have it all. But I had my dad beside me, went back to Grimsby, went to a Peach King game, which was awesome. A lot of family. My mom lives there. She was there the whole time, and it was a great weekend. They do such a good job, and Ron's the best, as we all know. Ron was great. Every time he speaks, he's amazing.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought up your dad, because I had some quick conversations with you in the summer. When you talk about having that edge, that chip on your shoulder, that toughness that you kind of get instilled, a lot of that comes from your dad, who that's what I took from our conversation, who I think you said you still don't think you could take to this day. Give me an idea how he has affected your life, the person you are, and the way you play the game.
Well, my dad is he was a steel worker for 25 years. Then he got into the unions, and then he worked out on the oil rigs during the strike. And now he's, huge advocate for mental health. He's the president of a steelworkers union in British Columbia. Like very, very well-rounded individual. Obviously comes from the streets of Hamilton and tough. Rode a motorcycle Harley and kind of hung around that crowd for a bit until he kind of figured out that's probably not the right decision long term. So, but like big into human rights and kind of started the Return to Right program in Canada and represents injured workers. I could go on about my dad, but he's a very gentle guy with a mean streak. So I've learned a lot, I think, over the years and watching him, like how to balance it. So being a guy who you don't want to fight in a hockey fight or a street fight, but also being somebody that, compassionate that, if you're struggling with something, you can pull them aside and talk to. I've always kind of prided myself on being both those things. And I think that probably comes from my dad because my mom's crazy and she's probably the toughest Bieksa. I don't mention her because it's common knowledge that she would rip all our heads off in a real fight. But I think the mix of toughness and compassion comes from my dad for sure.
Yeah, no easy segue, but I think you did the best we could there, Kevin. Obviously, you mentioned Rick Rippon earlier on. I mean, that day in August of 2011 is ingrained in kind of both of our minds pretty similarly. But for you, what's been like to see the legacy that is created out of that? And you touched on the mental health and what's being done in Rick's honor since that time, which is crazy to think now that it's been almost coming on 11 years and change.
Yeah, well, it's a lot's been done, and I'm pretty proud of. It's taken a lot of people to get to this point, but what's happened from his death? Because very easily nothing could have happened, and nothing could have changed, and it could have just been a sad story that nobody really wanted to talk about or do anything about. But we relaunched a website, mindcheck.ca, right after in January, and from the feedback that I got, it saved hundreds of people's lives in British Columbia, which was amazing. And then when I got traded to Anaheim, I kind of handed over the reins to Alex Burrows, and he took over admirably after that. And then Foundry BC ended up stepping in and acquiring them. So that's one area that we're pretty proud of. And then Hockey Talks is another thing that's an NHL initiative that was started by the Vancouver Canucks. And I think all the Canadian teams for sure, I think there's 13 or 15 NHL teams now that recognize that, where, a certain month of the season, they'll recognize a home game and have mental health at the forefront of that game and the conversation. That's another thing. I just was talking with Wes Rippon, Rick's brother, today, and we're planning on going to Vancouver for I think it's the 10-year anniversary in a couple weeks actually to drop the puck for their Hockey Talks day. So I know he's done a lot with the Ricky Rip Foundation and going around to schools and speaking to a lot of kids, because that was kind of the one thing that Rick articulated to me was he really wanted to help kids that were suffering from the same thing. I know a lot of adults struggle from mental illness, but I think kids were kind of at his focus because he was a young kid, I think, when he started with his issues, 16 years old. And I think he just really had a soft spot for kids, and he would have been a great dad. But going around the schools and speaking with children was kind of like the way he wanted to impact the world. And so I still do that as much as I can. And there's a lot of great people in the Canucks organization. There's a lot of great people in the Winnipeg Jets organization that have honored Rick's legacy and continue. Project 11 has done a great job. And so pretty proud of both organizations for keeping his legacy going and strong.
Kevin, you've brought up the names of Ryan Kessler, Alex Burrows, Rick Rippon, a lot of the guys that you spent.
I didn't bring up Kessler. Oh,
yeah, you did. You brought it up earlier. I wrote it down when you did to make sure. I want to get an idea. I remember that, what is it, the 03 Flames team that goes to the Cup. A whole bunch of them were in St. John's together, and they all kind of came up. And they one of the reasons given why that team was kind of, didn't have the highest names on it, but they did so well is because of the kind of kinship that they'd created with each other down on the farm and brought up. Give me an idea of the bond that's created between, those three players and you and some of the other guys who spent time in Manitoba and kind of came to the Canucks as a block of players.
Well, I don't think you can fake chemistry. I don't think it's something where you can just sit guys down and say, you guys have to have chemistry. You have to get along. I think it's just something that happens. First of all, it happens off ice and it also happens on ice. So all three of us in the minors together, struggling, like I mentioned, well, Kess obviously signed for a nice chunk of money for being a first rounder, but Burr starting in the East Coast League and myself on an ATO, we were playing hockey basically for the love of the game with a dream to make it to the NHL and struggling through the minors and just going through that hardship I think galvanizes you. And then coming up together, me and Rick Rippin were actually called up together to play our first NHL game. I played my first game. He played his first game the following night. And then Rick got hurt like a week and a half in. And Alex Burrows got called up to play his first NHL game because of that. So, like another thing that kind of galvanized Burr and I, and we hung out every single day and night together because we're living in the Sutton place together, playing in the NHL for the first time. It was, we felt like rock stars. And then off the ice, like all the workouts and the really hard training exercises and the skates and like your wives becoming friends and then having kids at the same time and all that stuff kind of led up to the 2011 playoff run where it all came together and we made the finals. And a lot of it that season, a big part of it just had to do with how close we were. Like all the adversity that we went through just didn't seem like a big deal because we were so close and not close in a way like you're my best friend, like we always get along. Like I would try to fight Burr in practice sometimes. I'd try to fight Kess. Burr would two-hand Kess in the ankles. We'd have like 2-week stints where Kess wouldn't talk to us because we were making fun of him, going onto the ice, hobbling. So it certainly wasn't like a perfect relationship, but it was one that we were really close. And at the end of the day, we had each other's back. And then, you add the Sedins to that, which are the two most amazing people ever. And you have Luongo, who's the ultimate competitor. And then you bring in super nice guys like Dan Hamhuis and Manny Malhotra and Alex Edler. It was just like a perfect storm. That all happened in 2011, but the start of it was me, Kess, and Burr for sure.
Yeah, no doubt about that. Even too, I mean, I mentioned Game 7 earlier, Kevin, but I was also at Game 2 that year. I mean, they had just made the Jets announcement that the NHL was coming back. So for me, I paid my own way to go to Game 2 because I wanted to see a Stanley Cup final at the highest level. And lo and behold, who scores the game winner in Game 2? Alexander Burrows. I mean, what was it like to be in that building and to sort of see that moment? I mean, I saw the after effects and Burr in the middle of his third scrum, he sees me and he goes, "Weber, what are you doing here?" Like, right, the guy just scored the biggest goal of his life. But you guys always sort of never forgot where you came from and you always had that appreciation. But what was it like to sort of see that pinnacle moment in a Stanley Cup final for, like you said, a guy who is basically a week or two away from potentially quitting hockey in the East Coast League? Now all of a sudden he scores the game winner in the Stanley Cup final.
I've said to so many kids over the years, I go, do you want to know what like a good story is or a good person to look up to that if you want to make it? Look at Alex Burrows. Go like familiarize yourself with Alex Burrows' story, where he came from, what he had to do to make it to the NHL, because I think the way Burr got there is so admirable. And he's literally earned every piece of hockey, every dollar he's made, he's earned everything. And the good old fashioned hard way. Burr is an amazing teammate. He's an amazing person. He's a prick to play against, and he's even a prick to be on your team sometimes. But I have so much respect for what he's accomplished with, everything he was given. And, that goal in overtime, it was off the opening faceoff too, I remember, right? Like Tim Thomas came out, Burr wrapped it. Luongo chirped Thomas in the media about how he would never be that far out of his crease, and that probably wasn't the right thing to do, Lou. But no, but Burr was amazing that whole playoff run. Burr scored 30 goals. I don't know how many seasons. It felt like every season he scored 30 once he got with the Twins, and not meant to be like a chirp by any means, but like Burr's probably not supposed to be scoring 30 goals. If you just kind of look at like the way his skill set is and everything, he got the most out of everything he had because he's just the ultimate. He's very, very smart, very, very intelligent hockey player, great hands, great instincts, great teammate, and he got the most out of everything that he was given.
I know, Kevin, you say that you didn't dwell on things very much and you didn't look back much throughout your career, but did the 2011 finals haunt you?
No, not anymore. Like, I don't know if they ever haunted me. I think once it was over, you're pretty upset because you're like, man, I was so close. Like, first of all, when it's first over, guys, to be honest with you, you're a little bit relieved. You're like, I'm so tired, I'm so beat up, I'm so mentally exhausted, and I'm just glad it's all over. And then like a couple days later, you're like, oh shit, like we were so close. We were so close. And then after that, you're like, okay, like we got most guys coming back. Like we'll probably get back there again. And then as time goes on, you realize that it's so hard to come by. And but no, like I think that run, like obviously, I always kind of relate it to like climbing Mount Everest. Ed Viesters was a guy who's we brought into our dressing room to kind of give us some sort of guidance and give us some inspiration. And he's the guy he's climbed all 14 summits over 8,000 meters without oxygen. First American, only American, I think, to do it. And he always said, listen, like when you set out to climb a mountain like Everest, the goal is to summit, right? But you got to go up and down, up to the first camp, down to base, up to second, down to first. You're constantly going up and down as a team to get climatized, to get supplies up and down. And then when you get to the summit, you get to the last base camp, the third, there's only like 2 or 3 people that actually get to make the climb to the summit. And sometimes you can prepare, you can do everything right, and you're like literally 300 meters from the summit, and you can see it right there, but the weather's coming in, and they're like, you guys have to turn around or you're going to die. So you just turn around, and all those, like that year, that 3 months of climbing and that year of preparation all go down the tube, and you don't summit. And there's nothing you can do about it. But he says, like, it's not so much about the summit, it's about enjoying the climb. And that 2011 run and everything that led up to it, man, we enjoyed it all. It was a great run. The celebrations were amazing when we won in overtime and in the finals, game 7 against Chicago. So I'm pretty grateful just that we were able to have that climb.
How about you? And then what was the shift like going to Anaheim, right? I mean, it was probably hard to leave Vancouver given everything that you'd invested there, but things ended up working out pretty well for you after the move. I mean, it's been a place that's been so important in the rest of your journey.
Yeah, well, so back to your earlier question, like talk about a different organization. So I'm used to Winnipeg, I'm used to Vancouver, and then boom, down to Anaheim, where things are done a little bit differently. The answer that I got pretty quickly and pretty often when I would ask, like, why do we do this? They're like, well, that's the way we've always done it. So I'm like, oh, okay, this is going to be great. Well, things probably have to change a little bit. That's not a good enough fan. So anyways, it was a bit of an adjustment, but one that we made, an adjustment all over the place, adjustment with families and kids not allowed in the dressing rooms anymore, and wives very, very distant from the rest of the organization. And it was just, there was a lot of things that were different. The weather's completely different now. There's no snow, there's no rain, there's just sun all day long, which is awesome. I really enjoyed that part. But new team, it was a veteran team, it was expected to win. We had a really bad start my first year, like 10 games in, I think we're 2-8. And I remember Bruce Boudreau came over to me in practice. He goes, how do you think you're playing? And I go, well, like, probably like everybody else, Bruce, like I can be better. And he goes, yeah. He goes, the way I look at it is we lost in the conference final last year, and now we brought in you and Chris Stewart and a couple other guys, and now we're not doing so well. So I look at it as you guys have to be better. And I'm like, oh, okay. So that was interesting. I've never been blamed for an entire team losing, but we had a couple really good teams there. My second year in Anaheim, I think we probably should have won the Stanley Cup that year. I think we lost to Nashville in the conference final. We were as equipped as any team I ever played on. So, but I ended up staying down there. I love it down there. Made some really good friends, and like I said, hockey's growing, and I'm glad to be a part of that.
Yeah, I covered that series. That was a heck of a series. Hey, I wanted to get your take on this because Jets fans look at that 2015 first round series, and the line in Winnipeg is always, they led for, I don't know what it was, but they were in the lead for the majority of that series, and yet they got swept 4 straight by you guys. I always liken it like this, like 2 guys are in a race, and they go around the corner and they see the finish line, and you guys just, once you saw the finish line, you turned to the Jets, you gave them a wink, and you just had that extra kick to get down the line. Was that series as close as Jets fans make it out to be, or how did you guys perceive that 2015 Jets team you beat in the first round?
So Weber, do you want to tell him or should I?
Yeah, I have bad news, Sean. Kevin only went to Anaheim the year after that.
Oh, gee. Okay. All right. Sorry.
So
Okay. Well,
I was playing my last year with Vancouver, and we were playing Calgary, and that was the introduction to Furland into the world. So I was too busy in that first round getting run by Furland every shift, but that was Kess's first year, and I think Kess had a monster series against
He
Winnipeg.
did.
But I remember those guys talking about it the following year, thinking we can't believe we swept the Jets. Like that was the start of when I remember Winnipeg was so good, big, strong, tough, fast. And I think everybody around the league was kind of looking at that series like, wow, like I can't believe that the Jets actually got swept, let alone like we can't believe they lost, but like get swept. I think that was a shocker to everyone. But if you ask Cass, he'll tell you he was the reason that they won.
He had a pretty important series, that's for sure. And Sean, my apologies. I totally blanked out when we were talking about this earlier.
it's all right. It's all right.
That's just good TV. This is good TV.
I see what you've done here. It's okay. It's okay.
We're ganging up on you, Kevin.
I probably should have done my research. I probably should have gone and double checked that question before.
I was just honestly just about to text you after looking at Hockey DB. But anyways, Kevin, how did you know it was the end? And you talked about the closure element. I mean, how tough was it to come to that decision? Because I mean, even there were times that year when people kind of wondered if you might play again, and even there were some whispers, given what was going on around the Jets defense core, that maybe you might kind of end up here at one point. What was it like to kind of go through that process and kind of hang up the blades, I guess?
Well, I mean, it was difficult to know because physically I knew I could have still played, and it was a matter of finding like the right fit that. Like I'm a big family guy. I don't know like how public that is. I'm a pretty private guy personally, but I'm a big family guy, and that means like everybody's a big family guy. But like I value being around my kids and my wife. Like I want to be around them. I want to be present. Being a professional hockey player, you're gone for half the time, and even when you are home, you're like your head's not always there. You're preoccupied. You're at the rink for 6 hours in a row. Are you gonna be able to recover, Renny, from that question, or what?
I'm taking a battering in the chat room, and I can't stop laughing at the people taking me to task.
I can't see the chats. I want to see them. Though.
You don't need to see it. Nothing's being said. Don't worry about it.
So I'm a free agent, and Anaheim makes it clear they're not going to re-sign me, and I go to the market, and in the summer my offers are like Columbus and Ottawa and Detroit and a bunch of teams where my wife is not going, right? She's like, we're staying in Anaheim. The kids are going to continue to go to school here. If you're going to keep playing, you're going to live in a hotel on your own, and we'll make the best of it. I support you. And I'm like thinking, okay, like that sounds like a blast for me, right? Like, so anyways, didn't commit to any of those teams. And then the season starts, and I'm like, I'm just going to keep training and see if something closer or something better comes along. And then Spengler, I'm on the golf course. I get called by Sean Burke, and he goes, do you want to come to the Spengler? I'm like, perfect. So then I go to Everett. I train with them for a week, and then I go to the Spengler Cup. And after the Spengler, I'd already kind of committed to Hockey Night in Canada to work in the All-Star game in January. It's the end of January in San Jose. And they said, if you're not playing or you haven't signed with a team, will you work the All-Star game? And I said, yeah, that'd be a great experience. So anyways, I get back from the Spengler, had a good Spengler, led the team in ice time every game. I have another few other conversations with teams, a bunch of teams overseas, and same thing. Do I want to live in Switzerland or live in Sweden or live in Russia by myself and play the last 2 months of the season, right? Or, do I come back to Canada and to the US and try to find another spot? So anyways, lots going on there. Like, you don't have a long enough podcast for me to explain every scenario, but I ended up going to the All-Star game, and I'm staying in the Fairmont where all the players are staying. And my son and his buddy are running around asking for autographs for all the kids, and they're like in the restaurant. It was kind of closed, and my son comes back and he goes, Dad, the guy in the restaurant just kicked us out and I go, well, what are you doing there? He goes, well, we're trying to get Blake Wheeler and Mark Scheifele's autograph. And I go, okay, like I know Scheif's a buddy of mine. I play with him. I go, I'll come with you, and don't worry, I'll figure it out. So I go in there, and they're having a lunch, just them with their wives, and Chipper and Paul Maurice, and Scheif's parents were there, who I met in the World Championships. So kind of go over there and I'm saying hi to them, and Paul Maurice, we start talking, and he's like, "Well, what do you think about coming to Winnipeg?" And I'm like, "Yeah, like it sounds good. Like, let's talk." So, the main thing I told Paul Maurice, and I think I can kind of disclose this because he's moved on now, and not that any of it was bad, like just the transparency of it. He's like, "Would you come to Winnipeg for our playoff run?" And I said, "Yeah, the only thing I'll ask you, or I'll tell you, for me coming there is I don't care how much I play. I don't care what position you play me in, but I have to be in the lineup. If I'm going to move to Winnipeg and I'm going to live in a hotel for 4 months without my family, like, you have to tell me if I'm healthy that I'll be in the lineup." And he said, "Okay, well, that's a conversation we have to have. And it's basically between you and Sami Niku. And if we decide that you're the guy that's going to play over him, then we'll tell you and we'll bring you in." And I don't know how that conversation ever went, but never really circled back, which kind of tells me that they chose Sami Niku, which also tells me it probably wasn't a good decision, because I don't think he played too many more games for the Jets after that. But that's kind of the way it happens. So I think just a little bit of an interesting story for the fans. But I loved Paul Maurice when I played for him for a short time. I love Chipper. I still talk with Chipper. That would have been a cool little way to end my career, though, I think.
That's good stuff. I hadn't heard that story before. When you think back on your time in Winnipeg, what stands out to you about Ken Wiebe?
Well, Weber used to have hair. That's the one thing that I know a lot of people don't really believe, but Weber used to have hair. But I just remember Weber always, obviously has a passion for the game, but just very fair in all your articles, and never really malicious, and never just, you love the game, you love Winnipeg, you love the team. I think you're great with the players. And I can't say that for a lot of writers over the years. There was a lot of, scumbags in Vancouver and Anaheim I had to deal with. And I always loved talking with Weber and enjoyed reading all of his articles. And one of the few guys that I still keep in contact with out of all the media guys. There's not many, right? And Weber, you're definitely one of them. And Renny, I still don't know if I like you, but I'm trying to figure it out.
Thank you for the kind words. I look forward to hoping that we can get out and golf at Pelican Hill one day. But just a quick one on the current lot in life, Kevin. I mean, obviously you enjoy what you're doing. How did you know that you could show the personality? I mean, because you've known this from your time as a player. It's such a button-down sport. Whereas now you're bringing humor to a panel. I mean, that was something that's kind of foreign in a lot of ways. When it comes down to it, a little bit of maybe Charles Barkley-esque kind of TNT flavor on the broadcast. How did you know that would work, and did anybody deter you from trying to be yourself on those panels?
Well, when you get teed up from these like granola interviews or granola monologues that Renny does, and it's like, "Oh, the Ottawa Senators, yeah, a couple COVID cases, haven't played in 19 days. No shit, Sean." So you got to kind of like bring a little bit of humor. No, but I think you guys know me pretty well, and I think what you see on camera is who I am. So if you think I'm trying to make jokes too much, or you think I'm trying to be like, you're wrong. Like, that's who I am. Like, I think you guys can attest to that. I'm just myself. So whether people like it or not, that's who I'm going to be. And so far, it seems like a lot of people enjoy the humor. That might be short-lived and that might go away, but that's just who I am. I chirp everybody. I chirp my mom. I chirp my kids. I chirp the lady at the drive-thru. I chirp my baristas. That's just in a good way, right? Like, that's just who I am. I like to have fun. I think life's amazing. And if I'm not chirping you, I probably don't like you too much. So maybe that's an exception for Elliot. But from the beginning, I've really enjoyed the crew. It's like a good team where you just enjoy coming to the rink every day. I enjoy, and I fly from LA to Toronto every weekend. And as soon as I get to the studio, I love it. I enjoy like working with, David, Amber, and Elliot, and Ron and Kelly. It's been like 3 years now working with them, and I enjoy every second of it. But then like the people behind, like the producers and, Brian Spear and Kathy and everyone else, that Ed and Rob, everyone that has, and Sean, all these people are, and they're great people to work with. I really enjoy it. So it makes showing my personality easy. I don't know about you, Renny, but I haven't really had that talk yet. Like, tone her down. I'm sure it'll come, but they're super encouraging of just do you and be yourself, and you can say anything once. So they always tell me. So I'm like, yeah, okay. I can apologize with the best of them, though, guys. Right?
Well, to that point that you're making there, like hey, guys like Ken and I, we go to school to do what we do, right? We go get journalism degrees to do what we do, and there's a lot of training that's involved in there. I don't know what your training was to get into this afterwards, but the part you're talking about being you on camera is one of the hardest things to do, especially in broadcast, is kind of get that out. But the other tricky part about it is we've all spent time in in hockey dressing rooms, which can kind of not be a not for print kind of area. And one of the things I've always been admired about the way that you do broadcast is you seem to have a real good understanding in live TV in the moment of how far you can go up to that line without crossing that line. That's not easy to do. How much thought do you put into doing that? And how much of it is just sometimes you starting to head in a direction and catching yourself in the moment before you go too far?
Well, the first part of your question there, I don't try to be you or Weaver. That's the thing. Like, I don't try to be a polished journalist because I'm not. So I'm myself. Like, I make mistakes. I don't look at the right camera sometimes. I miss my cue. Sometimes the camera comes on me and you look all nice and polished, Sean, and you got your mic ready and you got your tie straight. And sometimes I'm like on my phone looking at stats. So I don't try to be what I'm not, right? I'm a guy who played hockey and I talk about it now. So I think that's the key is knowing who you are and knowing who you aren't. So I think that's maybe like, it's fun to see me mess up and make mistakes and not look at the right camera. But I can't even remember the other part of your question. See, this is another real moment. Well, but getting to that line, I think that's what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Getting to the line, I think, and I've had my fair share of almost and slip. Yeah. I remember like a couple weeks ago, I said the F word under my breath, and then I kind of like covered it. And Elliot goes, "Did you just swear?" Like right on air. And I'm like, "No, like what are you talking about?" But I did under my breath. I'm like, when Kelly asked me a question. But I think coaching kids, and I have a couple groups at my academy, and one's 9 and 10 and 11-year-olds. So I think you obviously can't swear around 9, 10, and 11-year-olds. So I think learning how to be passionate and talk and instruct and not let out an F-bomb. I probably learned that a little bit from the high school kids that I coach on my son's team. Those kids probably swear more than anyone I know. So not so much from that group, but I mean, you just have to make sure that you're saying the right things. And sometimes you take a pause here or there if you think you're going down that line. It's tough, like when you're reacting though, and you're getting into like jostling battles with somebody else on the panel and you're going back, and those are the tough ones. When you're rehearsed and like, okay, I'm going to talk about Thomas Chabot, or I'm going to talk about Austin Matthews. Like, it's easy because you're prepared that way, but it's when you go back and forth and you're reacting to somebody else's comments where the human nature and the hockey dressing room mentality comes out, where you could, it's very uncommon, or it's not uncommon to look around the dressing room and be like, F you to somebody chirping you, but you obviously can't say that on TV.
Yeah.
Kevin, the writer in me has to ask, you have a famous writer in your home. What was it like to see Katie go through the writing process, and did you have any input in any of her book?
No, not a lot of input. The only input I had was a little bit with the cover, which she hates. So I obviously didn't do a good job there. I think there's a wine stain on the cover, which was my idea, but now she wants to change it. But she's got another book in publishing with the editor, and she's got another one she's writing. I'm so proud of her, but she's one of those people that takes credit for nothing. She won the Canadian Book Club Award with her first book. It's her second one's even better. And if you say, like, if I call her a writer to somebody when I'm introducing her, she's like, I didn't even write a real book. Like, stop it. Like, so if you're looking for humility in the family, like, look her way, because she's got all of it. But she's amazing, and I'm super glad that both my kids have taken after her. She's the brains of the family. She's the humility of the family. She's the one that keeps the thing going.
Kevin, you say you love to bust balls. Who is your favorite teammate whose balls you love to bust, and who is your favorite opponent you like to get under their skin?
You know who I like to get were the guys who wouldn't fire back, like the Twins, right? Like the Twins were so nice. I was probably the only guy in the history of the world that chirped Daniel Sedin. Like nobody else chirped Daniel Sedin except for me because, and not in a malicious way, just in a fun way. Because when I chirped Daniel Sedin, you should see the look in everybody in the dressing room. Like, oh my God, he just chirped Daniel. Like Daniel's the nicest guy. Like he never says anything about anyone, and I'm making fun of him. Not making fun of him, but I won't even tell you what I used to say about him. But I just think like Luongo did not like to be chirped. So when I chirped him, it was, it got a reaction out of the dressing room. On the ice, oh man, there's this guy named Rob Scuderi, and I don't know. I think he probably ended up getting into my grill more than I got into his. But I remember I threw a couple of good comments at him just skating by their bench because he was all over me all the time. He's like, oh, the sheriff's in town. Hey, sheriff, who are you going to arrest tonight? And he was always all over me. So I would make sure I had something good, and I'd skate by their bench, and I'd say something to him in front of all of his teammates. So there's a couple guys throughout the years. Adam Burrows was another guy who we probably don't even remember who he is, but he played in the NHL for Chicago. See, like I still can't help myself.
I remember.
I know you do. I still just want
turn it off.
I want to throw digs at Vern Fiddler was a guy who I had a history with, and it's funny because our kids are both 07s, and we cross paths now coaching, and he's a great guy, and we I have good talks with him now, but we just were relentless at each other on the ice over and over again.
Somebody mentioned that to me. There was a mockery, right? He tell the story there. Somebody sent me a note on Twitter saying, "Ask Kevin about this." Did he mocked you or something on the ice, or what was?
Yeah, you can search it on YouTube. So we went back and forth. We played against each other in the minors, played against each other in the NHL. But I'd always ask him to fight, and he'd say no, and it just drove me nuts. And then he would mock me, and apparently I did a face all the time on the ice, like a mean, tough face, and where I went like this with my eyebrows. And so he started doing it the one face-off in Dallas, and the other line came on. Like he wasn't even supposed to be on the ice, but he wouldn't leave the ice, and he's skating around like doing this face, and it was such a like everybody just stopped, referees, both teams included, and just watched him, and they thought he was having like a seizure or something. He was skating around making my face, and Alain Vigneault, the camera was on him. He just started dying laughing. He thought it was the funniest thing ever, and then he apologized to me after the game, and I'm like, I don't care. Like, so it's just a good comical moment. And he says he lives in Kelowna now, and he goes to the grocery store today, and he still gets people that come up to him and ask him about, like, do the Bieksa face. So a stupid face.
Well, Kevin, I gotta say, you said it earlier, you bust balls of the people you like. I think that means that the Kenny and Renny show is in pretty good standing in your books, because you absolutely roasted us here today, which our chat room loves, because they love to spend their time doing that. You gave them plenty of reason to do it. You were the great white whale, the guy we were constantly trying to get on the show, and I think that our audience can see why. It was absolutely phenomenal catching up with you. We really appreciate your time. Had a ton of fun hanging out with you the last hour. Thanks for giving us your time. And if you ever want to join us for one of our post-game shows where we just get on and we kind of freestyle it with the audience and talk about the Jets, if you've ever watched a Jets game or something like that and you want to come on, the audience is begging you to come on because they see enough of Ken and I as it is. So the open invitation anytime you want to come join the Kenny and Renny show. Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, guys, I haven't done a podcast in over a year. I think it's been more than a year. But like I said, Weber and I have been talking back and forth, and we spent some time and respect both you guys a ton. So that's the only reason I'm on this. Obviously, you do a great job, but really enjoyed the last hour talking with you guys as well. It's been fun, and won't say no to the future. We'll see if we can make something work again.
Excellent stuff.
Thanks, man.
Thank you so much, Kevin. Well, that was phenomenal. Ton of fun. You know what story we didn't get to was the suit story. Should you tell that one before you go?
Well, back in the Moose days, I think I want to say it was in Chicago, but there were two places that Kevin mentioned the low salaries, the $35,000. In my early years, I wasn't making a whole lot of money over at the Winnipeg Suns. So the players would go in Cleveland to Hugo Boss. I never bought a suit from the Hugo Boss, but there was a tailor near Chicago where they would do 3-for-1 deals. And on this one, I went with a few of the players on one of these occasions, and of the 3 suits, Kevin gave me the extra one, and in vintage Kevin Bieksa fashion said, "You need this more than I do." So my wardrobe needed the improvement more. So I think we split it 50-50, but he gave me the extra suit. So just another one of those great examples of Kevin's generosity, not only with his time, but as an individual. As we mentioned, I mean, just a great person to be around. It's great to see what he's doing now. And like you said, we thank him for his time. He's, like I said, he's one of those guys. Alex Burrows was the same way. They always got back to you, right? Sometimes players in the minors, they go on to their next part of life and kind of leave that chapter behind. But these guys, as you can see, Winnipeg means a lot to them. And, Kevin's just one of the best human beings I've ever had the privilege of knowing. And we thank him for being on with us, and we continue to wish him great success, and also his family. I mean, this is a guy who loves his family and has really done a nice job on so many fronts.
Well, I'm going to tell you this from a Sportsnet perspective. You can see Kevin Bieksa. I think anyone that you would ever talk to him throughout his hockey career would have sang his praises as a teammate, the kind of guy who goes to battle for his teammates, but also does what he can to bring people in and make people feel part of the team. I think he's been absolutely phenomenal with that at Sportsnet. You heard him talk about us getting together and hanging out during the Cup final in Montreal. He talked about Ron, and we, probably should have got to that, although we've been going for an hour. But just hanging out with that crew, he's one of those guys you can tell it's a fun night if you're out with Kevin Bieksa, and everyone at that table gets drawn into it and made feel a part of it. He's a natural teammate, natural leader, and what a fun guy to have on. That was, I don't know, this may be, this is why we love these shows, Ken. We do it time and time again. We always say this, then we go out grinding, trying to find guests for the shows, and we're thinking, oh man, should we keep doing this? And then we get into these shows and we have an absolute time of our life doing it. So phenomenal job with him. One last thing before we go, we're going to have our post-game show tonight after a huge game. The Jets, let's call it a measuring stick game, even though they're out of the playoffs right now. Measuring stick game against the Colorado Avalanche, the team I have picked to go to the Stanley Cup Final from the West. Cole Perfetti draws into the lineup. Chance for CJ Cease to maybe get in the lineup, depending on how things go with Stastny and with Jansen Harkins and Dylan DeMello in the COVID protocol. Nate Beaulieu is coming in on the third line there. So interesting game. We're going to get to that tonight, but want to say one last thing, and we'll bring it up on the screen here. We've been really, really happy with our t-shirt sales out there. Really happy that you guys have been kicking in there. I know the website was down for a little bit earlier on today. We got that taken care of and fixed. We were doing pre-orders until midnight tonight, and we've been getting really, really good reviews from the people at Sportsnet, at the Sportsnet store, but we'd like to push some more. So if you're interested, we'd love to suit you up in some really good shirts. I'm wearing one of them right now, the Sean's headband shirt. We love these things. We love that you've been supporting us. If you'd consider doing it, again, pre-orders going on until midnight tonight. So if you'd love to jump in and buy one of those, we would be extremely appreciative of that. Just go to the Sportsnet store and you'll be able to find it. There's 2 collections there, Steve Dangle's and ours. So outside of Toronto, we're the only Sportsnet personalities with a clothing line, Ken. That's work that you and I worked on, and our chat room worked on, because some of our designs come exactly from that. I love this one.
That was unplanned, but it was pretty funny.
T-Will absolutely slaughtered me, as did a number of people after me getting that wrong. And I'll say this, I've prided myself in this show on the number of times that I've had elicited that's a good question from our guests over the past year of doing this. I don't think a show has gone by that I haven't got one of those, but I can tell you this chat room, they don't let you sleep here, Kenny. It's what have you done for me lately? And that was a big boo-boo by me. I'm going to have to wear that. And I'm guessing I'm still going to hear about it in the chat room tonight. I'm okay with that. With that.
I honestly, as soon as I said, I turned it over.
I know what you did. You set me up. You set me up. I know.
I was like, oh my God. I asked Kevin about Anaheim. I know Sean is going to follow up. I went and clicked on Hockey DB. I'm like, oh my God, no, he was still in Vancouver.
Yeah. Oh, well, what are you going to do? Anyways, hey.
Awesome stuff. That was so fun.
They kept us honest
the
here
receipts,
tonight.
they got the receipts.
They got the receipts. I love that they do that. Keep being you, chat room, because you rock it. Thank you so much for joining us. Thanks to Kevin Bieksa for joining us. That was a ton of fun. Ken, awesome job as usual. We can't wait to see you later on tonight after that Jets game. Hope to see you all there.